A Robert Graves' Claudius the God is a historical novel first published in 1935. It's the sequel to I, Claudius, which came out a year earlier. It continues the fictionalized autobiography of the titular character who was made Emperor of Rome at the end of the first book, and provides an account of his 13-year reign. In addition to detailing Claudius's successes and challenges as a ruler, it also features sections that function as a biography for Herod Agrippa, Claudius's friend and the king of the Jews. Like its predecessor, Claudius the God has a heavy emphasis on historical figures and events, but this isn't dry history. Claudius fancies himself a historian, but the details of his account are colored by his unique voice and character. He considers himself a cripple and only survives the corruption and bloody power struggles that decimate his family because he's dismissed as posing no true threat to them. Once he finds himself ruling the empire, he looks to undo the societal and political damage that Tiberius and Caligula, the two previous emperors, brought to Rome. His narration is intelligent, observant, and humorous at times, and this helps breathe so much life into the history he recounts. Claudius the God is more political than the previous novel. Because it deals with a much smaller time frame in as many pages, it gets into much more detail, and we read about how Claudius maintains power and works with the Senate, how he undertakes large-scale public works projects, and about his growing tension with his friend Herod, who amasses power in the East. We also learn about his military campaign in Britain, and he even addresses the rise of early Christianity. The plot doesn't move with the same pace as it did in the first novel, and some of the charm of the protagonist wears off as he begins to behave in ways that parallel those he previously hated. Robert Graves explores this irony by suggesting that supreme power not only distorts the best intentions of heads of state, but wears on their humanity, health, and perhaps even their sanity. I first read this novel many years ago when I came upon it at one of those public library sales where they clear out withdrawn books. I'd thoroughly enjoyed I, Claudius, so when I saw the sequel sitting there on the cheap, I picked up this Random House edition. It's from 1962 and features a great image on the dust jacket. Under that, it has a red textured paper cover with some gold printing on the spine. The book has deckled edges and opens with an author's note where Robert Graves addresses some of the criticism he received about the historical accuracy of the first novel. This is a solid little edition, but it's old and beat up. 6 months ago, when I got my hands on the Folio Society version of I, Claudius, I was so impressed that I knew I had to keep my eye out for their edition of the sequel. And eventually, I managed to get one. So let's upgrade this thing. Here we have Claudius the God from the Folio Society, and I'm so happy to finally have it. This edition was originally released in 1995, and is presented in a dark blue slipcase with a curved edge to provide easier access to the contents. The book itself is wrapped in purple cloth with a gold design by the great Neil Packer. The design is made up of vines, leaves, and apples, and has the same placement that it had for I, Claudius, but in my opinion, the gold foil pops better against the purple. On the spine, we have the title and author name blocked in gold. The binding is appropriately finished with a purple headband, and the top edge of the text block has a great color treatment. When we crack the book open, we see heavy printed end papers with 2 family trees in purple text and drawn by Dennis Baker. The first is for Herod the Great and is new, while at the back we have the imperial family tree, which was also included as the end papers in the previous book. The book is printed on eagle wove paper, which is smoother than the alderley wove used in my first edition of I, Claudius. Here the paper is close to ultra white according to color swatches, providing a high degree of contrast. If we bring back the old Random House edition for a brief side-by-side, we can see that the Folio Society version is much bigger, with an extra 4 centimeters in height and 1.5 centimeters in width. Inside, both editions feature tight spacing, but the Folio Society has more generous side margins than the Random House version, which makes it more inviting to read. The paper is whiter, and the text is blacker and much more crisp, which greatly enhances the readability. This is especially important for books like this with lengthy paragraphs, as it makes the reading itself less exhausting on the eyes. However, I did notice some problematic printing issues here. Perhaps it's just my copy, but there were the odd ink splotches like these, and I also noted a few minor typos in this book, but don't recall noticing any in I, Claudius. The book opens with a map, also by Dennis Baker. It's adorned with some wonderful details at the top, and they move all around the sides of this image. The Folio edition features a unique introduction from John Mortimer. He shares his own personal interactions with author Robert Graves, then considers the historical Claudius versus the fictional character, which Graves certainly informed with aspects of his own personality. Mortimer looks at some of Robert Graves' poetry, and also addresses Alan Massey's introduction from the previous Folio Society Claudius novel in his own solid 5-page introduction. This intro does allude to the end of the novel, and should probably only be looked at after you've read to the end of the book at least once. This folio version also features the author's note from Robert Graves, just like the old Random House edition did. Artist Neil Packer returns here. Beyond providing illustrations for I, Claudius, this fantastic artist may be familiar to folio fans for his work on 100 Years of Solitude or The Name of the Rose. He has provided 8 color illustrations and 24 black and white illustrations in this edition. The color artwork sometimes falls right next to the page where the corresponding text can be found, but at other times it's up to a dozen pages away, while the black and white integrated illustrations always fall at the end of their respective chapters and help to punctuate the close of that section. Let's take a quick look at the black and white artwork first. In the folio edition of I, Claudius, the integrated illustrations were often sketches of elements that also appeared in the color images, but in Claudius the God, they seem to be more unique and purposeful. They are distinct and strongly related to the specific details of the text. They hit harder in terms of emphasizing the central theme or event of each chapter. They range in size from small pieces of a few square centimeters to larger illustrations that fill up over half a page, and include symbolic objects and architecture, while some employ textual elements to great effect. There are whimsical images, creative pieces like this recipe for tongue pastries, and some that are deadly serious in their subjects. My favorite of the bunch might be this one, which features a human profile hidden in a map. It's great. Now let's take a more detailed look at the color images. Mr. Packer continues with the style he established with his work in I, Claudius, combining classically rendered nude forms, often contorted into unsettling positions, with rich backgrounds full of texture, color, pattern, and detailed architectural elements. The grotesque and surreal aspects, combined with the graceful elegance of the forms, results in haunting, unsettling, but powerful illustrations. In the frontispiece, we see a sort of collage with Claudius in the center and the other important characters like Herod Agrippa around him. The image of Claudius is pretty cool because it echoes back to the pose he had from the first book. From the image depicting where he caught a wolf cub falling from the sky as a small boy, and he learned of his great and improbable destiny. The continuity between the books, from the design to the introductions to the artwork, is one of the supreme pleasures of this version of Claudius the God. In the second color illustration, we see a depiction of the aftermath of the brutal murder of the mad Emperor Caligula. Herod Agrippa comes upon it and lies the corpse on the imperial bed. We get depictions of Cassius Caria, the actor Mnenster, and an anthropomorphized Drusilla. Beyond the contorted poses of the figures, I really love how the landscape reverts to a geographic map at the top, and I like the cosmic canines at the bottom of this image. That's followed by an illustration of Claudius as he attempts to restore order to Rome. This is depicted with a number of symbolic elements, like the many scales that struggle to find balance between various items and an apple, which I take as a symbol of virtue. Claudius himself is being balanced here as well. The labyrinth suggests the complexity of the task, while the tree emerging out from it suggests how lineage and birthright are used, as Claudius looks to restore the Senate and appoint ministers that will help rebuild the empire. The fourth illustration depicts one of Claudius's most important public works projects, the completion of the city's aqueducts. This project takes 9 years to complete, but is a marvel as it doubles Rome's water supply. We see the two sources, the new Anio, which has to be slowed down by these gradual inclinations, and the Claudian water, which runs below it. The figure of Claudius, depicted as an irrigator with an umbrella and watering can, stands at the top. In the middle of the image, we see the healthy fields, and below that, the bounty of produce that the new system yields. The fifth illustration depicts a proverb, "No man cried stinking fish." After Claudius learns of a brewing rebellion against him, he visits the Senate and addresses them, highlighting his own shortcomings and asking them for clear direction on how he should proceed. Vinicius speaks out in support of Claudius and evokes the proverb to his fellow senators in order to convince them to add their own support. Neil Packer illustrates another anthropomorphic figure here, this one with the head of a fish. Around it swarm a variety of creatures with fish bodies and the faces of men, which contribute to a disturbing and unsettling image. Next up is an illustration of Claudius's military campaign to Britain. His forces use elephants, camels, trickery, and advanced tactics to defeat Caractacus at Brentwood Ridge. The composition of this image is strong, with a triangular shape and dynamic poses from the figures. Down at the bottom we see an echo of the fish with a human face from the previous image. There's great color work up high with the comets in the sky, and the water at the bottom. This might be the best of the bunch. The seventh image depicts the mock triumphal parade that follows Claudius's actual celebration of triumph in Britain. The official triumph is highly organized and ornate, and is met with great support in the streets as it parades before the Roman people. At the end of this procession comes the comic triumph of Baba. Here we can see the pig, fox, sheep, and goat that pull the dung cart that carries the farcical version of Claudius and his consul, and below them are the clowns, who perform what Claudius calls the funniest things in a dirty way ever seen at Rome. The final illustration is a depiction of Claudius in the afterlife, as recounted in the satire called The Pumpkinification of Claudius. Mercury grabs Claudius as the crowd looks on. Below that are gruesome details, as Messalina embraces death, and there's these wonderful creepy blue demons that dance about. I'm so very pleased to add this edition of Claudius the God to my bookshelf. It isn't quite the novel that I, Claudius, is, and while the story and the writing itself might be a step down, and there were some printing and editing issues I don't recall from the first book in the series, I feel that the artwork is even better here, and I like the purple cover a whole lot more than the green. I happen to have the first printing in hand and don't know if they've released subsequent printings. That may be why the sequel is harder to find and is often about double the price on the secondary market, but I'm just happy to complete the little set of two. As for my old edition of Claudius the God, it's the box of doom for you. More room on the shelf means more books in the future. As always, thanks for watching, and if you'd like similar content, feel free to circle back to previous videos or keep an eye on this channel for future upgrades.